Hello, everybody. So yes, my name's Darren Fox. I've been with HFL now for just over a year. And before I start, I might just sort of quickly explain why I joined HFL. It is predominantly because of their expertship program, because I have formed a belief quite some time ago, a quite strong belief that experts need to start playing a far greater leadership role in their organizations and in society in general. And for all sorts of different reasons, it's not just a need, but they are going to be playing much more of a leadership role in organizations and influencing the direction of organizations. And so this idea of supporting that and enabling that was quite an attractor for me. So this data that I'm going to share with you is based on sort of trying to answer four key questions. And those key questions is this idea of mastery, master experts. What separates experts? How do we differentiate the two? What do they look like when they become master experts? And how can you actually identify this idea of mastery? And then how can organizations develop that? And then maybe some honest truths in terms of how organizations may actually get in the way of supporting this idea of mastery among their technical experts. And what do we mean by experts in the first place? I mean, there's perhaps I think 40 or up to 50 people who registered for this. If I asked everybody for their definition of expert, I'd probably get 40 or 50 different definitions. We have some very sort of simple ways of looking at it. We say just basically anyone who's taking a specialist technical work in any field, and they tend to be individual contributors or this idea of subject matter experts in that they're not leading teams. When we work with them in terms of our expertship program or our coaching, consulting, they are at a point in their career in terms of where they are just not interested in becoming a people leader now or ever, or they made a decision, leadership is not for me, but we teach them and coach them to skills that actually allow them to still influence and lead as an expert in their organization. But to tell you the truth, the definition that I really like, and please don't tell my boss that I said this, but the definition I like is in Wikipedia. And the one line that I really like about this is how they say that experts are whose judgment is accorded authority and status because of their knowledge and their technique or their skill. Sorry. So it's because of that. How you differentiate those experts is because people are coming to them to make decisions, to influence the direction of the organization. And also the experts are people who clearly have developed over time as sort of a lot of training and development in their field. So our data. So the data I'm sharing with you has been pulled from our 360 data. So we have an Expertship 360. It is a 360 specific for experts. And we ask experts, typical like 360, we ask them to rate themselves, then their managers rate them, their peers, and two different types of stakeholders. So in that immediate stakeholders, people who are benefiting directly from the services that the expert provides, and removed stakeholders tend to be much more senior executive leaders in the organization. So we're looking at around 4,000 stakeholder ratings of 400 experts, which is around 293,000 different data points. And that data involves software engineers, medical researchers, scientists, lawyers, people in health, and so forth. So, and what that 360 measures is not expertise. We don't actually measure the level of expertise. What we look at are perceptions in terms of how well the experts leverage their expertise to generate value in the organization and to actually lead and influence the organization. And so we have 9 different skills or capabilities, but they're fundamentally grouped into 3 key domains, which we look at. What is their ability to influence people in terms of the relationship, in terms of value domain, what is their understanding of the business strategy, and then the technical domain, but again, not technical expertise so much as their ability to develop others, to do knowledge transfer, and just develop the sort of overall knowledge of the organization. So answering those questions around what does mastery look like and so forth, from that came our sort of 4 key recommendations, which I'll share with you right now. And the first one is on average, if you really want to get bang for your buck in terms of your development budget, where you actually want to spend your money and your effort is building the commercial acumen and their ability to lead and influence change in their organization. The stereotype that experts are bad with people, we're going to show you has actually been proven wrong. And quite often when we set up development programs and organizations for experts and technical experts, there's this idea that we really need to focus on their soft skills and working with others. Our data is saying that's not the priority. The third recommendation is if you can find experts who actually show an interest and are capable and good at mentoring, succession planning in terms of building, finding successors for their own role, looking at outside the organization and hypothesizing in terms of different emerging trends which could affect the organization in some way, recruit them, and then really support their ability to do that as well. And then finally, this is going to take some explanation, this idea of hidden parts of the expert role. This kind of gets more into how organizations sort of get in the way by sort of putting experts into a box where we've shown that experts can really sort of make a difference in areas that are sort of typically not in that job description for experts. So understanding the data is, like I said, there's 293,000 data points within our data. I can only show you a snapshot. So I'm going to show you a very brief snapshot of some of this data. We're going to send you this presentation afterwards, but later you're going to see a much more sort of detailed research pack that will give you more than just a snapshot of the data. So recommendation 1, this idea of how did we get to this arrival of around commercial acumen and the leadership of change, is that we took a look at what are the lowest scoring items and what we found is that on average, like this is the majority of experts, we found that they struggle to influence change or persuade others who have entrenched embedded points of view, right? So we're gonna find they're actually good with people and relationships. That doesn't necessarily translate into this idea, can I actually influence things? Can I actually influence people? They tend to underestimate the impact of politics or the emotional side of decision making. So they tend to rely a bit too much on just the rational evidence-based technique of influencing. And we know that there's multiple ways of influencing other people, but they tend to get frustrated by why isn't the data sufficient? And then they can be in their sort of box in terms of whether it's a corporate ivory tower or in the lab. They can be disconnected quite often from the customer and the real world of how you run your business, how your business makes its money, how your business makes decisions in terms of what markets and what products to get into or out of. And then when we roll these questions up into their domains, of which we said there's 3: value, which is the business side of things, the relationship side of things, and then the expertise side of things, we find that 7 of the 10 lowest common items are all in that business side of things. So understanding change, how do I influence change? How do I understand the business I'm in? So for example, the second one there, I explore future unmet needs of existing and future customers of the organization, is the second lowest rated item in the entire database on average. Or another one around change impact. Can I act as a catalyst for change and help set up the agenda? Was the 7th lowest item. So recommendation 1, really focusing on the commercial, building their business side knowledge, how the business makes money, and helping them understand how change is done. Recommendation 2, so this is the one, busting that stereotype that they're not good with people, because according to our database, in actual fact, they are. They make great team players. They are highly collaborative. They're positive and optimistic. And they tend to actually be they share their knowledge and information. For the most part, they're not the hoarders we hear about. And we take a look at the domains again. The 7 out of the 10 most positive skills, 7 of them are in the relationship domain. So in terms of being a positive and inspirational, showing humility, we do know that they can be humble to a fault, however. The vast majority of times when we're coaching people through their 360 results, the expert themselves rate themselves far lower than anybody else, right? So they rate themselves lower than the manager, their peers, their stakeholders. More often than not, the vast majority of times, they really underrate themselves. And then, and highly good at collaboration as well. So working across multinational, multicultural, or multiple divisions. So that relationship side, this idea that they're not people is not quite right. But what we do know, like I said before, is that doesn't necessarily translate into good influencing skills, persuasion skills, storytelling, but they work well in a team. So recommendation 2, don't assume that if you make those assumptions that we're just going to create a learning program for our experts overall around developing soft skills and whatnot, it potentially could be a waste of money. And we do find that experts get a bit frustrated with that. Recommendation 3 and 4. So this was a bit sort of a bit of a hybrid, trying to the data. There's no one set clear of data that allowed us to come to this like recommendation 3 and then recommendation 4. So the next number of slides, I'm going to go through a bit before I actually explain how do we get to these conclusions. So recommendation 3 and 4 is we found, now this is going to take a bit of explanation, is experts and their managers are quite consistent in terms of how they feel about how they rated the experts. Stakeholders feel a bit differently, right? So, but what we do find, and I'm sorry, I forgot to mix this up. So these, ignore the arrows. So these are the bottom 10 questions. And as you can see here, rated 1 through 10. And the green means that the expert rated themselves more positively. And red means that the expert rated themselves more negatively than the overall average, right? And the numbers just mean the difference. So I actively identify and groom successors was the lowest scoring item on average, but experts themselves rated themselves 5 points higher. So that was the 6th lowest scoring item. So not a big deal, but down here you can start seeing some differences here in terms of how they perceive themselves being significantly more effective at things like change or supporting decision-making or change again, or understanding the market, the competitive market that the business is in. And then when we look at managers, you can see it's pretty much spot on in terms of how they feel about the experts. But when you actually then compare it to everybody else, so people who sit outside that manager-expert relationship, the stakeholders feel a bit differently in terms of how they're rated. So these are the comparisons here around peers, immediate, and removed stakeholders. Removed stakeholders are the senior leaders, the executives of the organization, tend to rate them more negatively, so by the amount of red. The other thing that we then looked at is that organizations put their experts into these technical boxes. And so we looked at items where there was a wide range of responses from between high and low, but we also looked at the number of times that each questions had an NA, so not applicable. And what we found was that senior managers are much more likely to believe that experts should not be doing certain things. So senior leaders are much more likely to believe that experts don't have a role in really sort of strategizing for the future. So looking at, emerging needs, looking at who our future customers might be, looking at trends that could inform the future of the organization. The more senior you become, the less likely you are to believe that, or more likely you are to believe that you shouldn't be involved in the future or sort of developing the future experts of the organizations. So this idea of, well, they shouldn't really be finding successors. Should they be mentors? Should they actually be working with junior colleagues to develop their personal growth plans? Senior leaders are not entirely sure. And then finally, you're much more likely to believe that if you're a senior leader, that experts should not be working in terms of outside the organization. Their focus should be internal. Yet, the interesting thing here is that when we take a really hard look at the data and we looked at high performers, we found that when leaders do agree that these things are part of the expert's mandate, is part of their job, they rate the experts particularly higher than anybody else. So the leaders are rating him higher than anybody else, higher than the managers, higher than their peers, that about the impact that they're having on the future of the organization. So recommendation 3 and 4 from all this data that we found is that if these are the differentiators, so when we looked at the difference, what separates an expert from this idea of becoming that master expert? The differentiators are these things. So those things that are they are looking externally and forming hypothesis in terms of the issues and opportunities out there that could be impacting the business, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years down the road, and then forming hypothesis in terms of how the organization could respond to that, and then having forums to be able to share that with their leaders. Experts who actually see themselves as leaders of the organization, and so therefore they're trying to groom successors for their role and trying to lift the overall level of knowledge within their business, within their domain or their specialty. These individual things appear to be the greatest differentiators that lift these people to mastery, where they're adding real value to the organization and taking a leadership position where they're influencing the direction of the organization itself. So what can we do? What does the data say, and what does our experience say about? Yes.
Sorry, Darren. Could we stop for a sec?
I was just about to ask for questions at this point.
Yeah, I think, one of the things that, sorry, let me turn my video on. One of the things that I would be keen to sort of have people talk about is this resonating with you in terms of your own work with experts? One of the questions we've had, which maybe you could talk to while sort of people are thinking about this question, Darren, is from Greg Porter. What were the sizes of the organisations that this data comes from? Were they public or private? I think you have a slide about that later, but do you want to just sort of quickly discuss that? But I think, do people have comments about, that there's a few recommendations that have been made here, which are particularly that the commercial acumen is a really big issue with experts, significantly more than relationship skills, which I don't know that that's sort of the industry's understanding. And it would be interesting to hear what other people thought of that. But Darren, can you sort of talk a little bit about the data?
Yeah, so the data is pulled from, I can't remember how many companies, but probably around 40, 50 companies, maybe, of both great and small. So some are small businesses, some are quite large international organizations in terms of health or insurance. We have clients both in public and in private, and in sort of quasi-government agencies as well, and across industries. Really. So we found that there is no sort of one sort of area or industry or type of organization that is sort of forming the majority of our database. It's really across the full breadth of industries and businesses out there.
Okay. Why don't we move on and come back to the sort of resonance thing once we've had a talk about the recommendations.
All right. So what the data is telling us, and based on our own sort of experience over the last few years in terms of our coaching and consulting, in terms of what actually leads to improvements in these areas, is I'm going to share with you now. So recommendation one is, this idea of the commercial acumen and taking a leadership role. So one of the key things that you could do here is developing an understanding in change management techniques and frameworks and tools. Understanding in terms of what's the change curve, what's some typical sort of change management approaches and methodologies that are out there, and build awareness, if not full-on sort of training in those change methodologies. The other thing is get them mobile. So experts can often be stuck in a particular specialty, and quite often they're working with people much like them in terms of their areas of knowledge, fellow experts, and they can get disconnected from the business, they can get disconnected from the customer. So moving them around the business and getting them to apply their knowledge and their expertise in different ways, in different parts of the business, but really finding ways to get them to, if not interact directly with the customer, can be quite a powerful way to sort of overcome this sort of, I don't want to call it the corporate ivory tower, but this being isolated and being sort of disconnected from the realities of the day-to-day business. And then really, if you're going to do one thing, this one thing is really find some simple ways to get them to understand how the business makes its money, which products are they in and not in, but the decisions that led to why we're in certain products and not to certain markets. So we have a tool called this Market Canvas that you can see on the right, where as pre-work for our program, we ask experts to fill this out about their company, and then we discuss how hard it was for them to fill it out. What was how did they access the data? What did they know off the top of their heads before asking anybody? And it'd be quite enlightening about how they struggle quite often to fill this box or these boxes about some basics about how the business is placed in terms of its competitive market and the industry that it's in and its customers. So that sort of simple thing can make quite a big difference. Recommendation two. So the idea of the stereotype that that they're bad with people is too general. It's not quite specific enough. It's more around how do they influence people as opposed to relationships. And so this is not something I've said. I can't remember where I heard it, but someone told me there's no such thing as difficult people. Only situations with different people find difficult. It's just that experts often are placed in situations where they might come across as being difficult, because what makes them strong can also be their greatest weakness because of their deep focus on the detail, the deep understanding of really complex problems and they try to convey that, or they feel like people don't understand them. That's their passion, that's their strength, but they're not necessarily being difficult. They just need a bit of help sort of understanding how do they actually influence people more effectively who do not share that same level of understanding or passion for their domain of expertise. So really, and get them networking, help in terms of internal networking, working with others, but also get them out there, because these experts can be great brand ambassadors in terms of these amazing people with this amazing level of knowledge that your organization has. You must be a great place to work, of all these smart people that are working for you. So getting them out there as brand ambassadors can be quite a positive thing for you. But really, if you do one thing, then do this, is really find ways to work on, improve their influencing skills. How do you understand the needs of your stakeholders, their motivators, and how do I adjust my pitch in such a way as an expert to meet the needs of the people who I'm trying to influence or who my stakeholders are? And so we have a tool called the Health Check for stakeholders. You get really people think about, what do I know about this person or these group of people? what are the drivers, the motivators, and then so they're not change who I am, but then how do I sort of change my pitch slightly to meet the needs of the people who I need to influence today, which might be different to how I need to change my pitch for the people I need to influence tomorrow.
Just before we go on, Darren, could we stop for sort of 2 questions?
Sure.
Yeah. Okay. So we have 2 from Bronwyn, one from Bronwyn, one from Nicole. Bronwyn's asked, how do you help change the perception that experts can be seen as change resistant, i.e. they're not as interested in company strategy, they're more interested in doing their specific job really well?
I mean, well, so that's the trick, right? So they can be, they may not necessarily be change resistant, but they can be so passionate about their level of knowledge or about their domain of expertise is that they get bored about everything else. So it's end up being the typical sort of career conversations in terms of how do you help the manager have the conversation with the experts to help them understand in terms of their ability to make real progress in the organization as a career, or to actually really influence the direction of the organization. This because of what they know of their knowledge, or in terms of their level of knowledge or what they know what's happening out there, they're probably aware of all sorts of things that's coming down the pipeline now or even 5 years that they're trying to convince the organization, you need to be aware of this, you need to get on board, we need to change. And then they get frustrated that no one's listening to them. But it's the experts who are not making the connection in terms of, well, when you're influencing leaders, you need to understand the market context. You need to be able to relate it back to the business in terms of how do you actually teach them how to write a business case? How do you understand how this is going to impact profits and margins? They need to be able to make that shift and understand, therefore understanding strategy, understanding the business is critical for them to actually understand, for their ability to be the influencers of change that I think a lot of experts really want to be. Was there a second question?
Yeah, and the second question was, actually, Nicole Williams, is it possible to just get you to jump on and explain this question? You've said it's fascinating insights of how leadership score less on factors of expertise, considering how many preach about hiring the best or having hired the best. How do we get the experts over that hurdle? Are you sort of asking about how leaders are saying that they're hiring the best, but they're not really doing it?
Hi, can you guys hear me okay?
We can.
Yes.
Awesome. So yeah, it was just really good to see those, the results from that survey, because obviously we work for great organizations and our leaders always talk about, they tell us that, oh yes, we've hired the best, we're working with the best, we've got the best team, etc. But it was interesting to see in those results that they actually negatively, not maybe in a conscious way, but it is interesting that even if they have, those results sort of show that even if they are hiring the experts and, they happen to have a middle manager in between, there's just that maybe the way I've translated it is that there's a little bit less trust, even though they've hired someone who is an expert in their field. But then afterwards, in the next slide, it showed that once leadership actually believes or has that maybe those hygiene factors with those experts, it's actually really positive. So it's just about that little hurdle. How do we get our experts over that so they can actually have this amazing trusted relationship with our leaders and actually show that leaders that they have hired someone who's really good at what they do.
Yeah, so it can be a bit of a catch-22, right? So leaders can hire the intent that we're hiring the best experts, but quite often they're hiring them to be the experts within that, put them in a box. This is the job of an expert, right? So it's the idea, and I think I might, is the next one? No. So I might just jump to recommendation 4. Where is it? I can't find it. Maybe I oh well, sorry, is moving the idea of the expert as a service provider to strategy, which is how a lot of people, leaders view experts as, okay, give me the report and then I'll figure what we do with it strategically. Thank you. See ya. So turning experts from a service provider to a strategic partner in terms of actually being actively involved in the development of the strategy in real time. And that can be quite a shift. Now, it's also a catch-22 because then leaders get frustrated with the experts who don't have some of those influence skills or understanding skills or sort of business skills to translate the opportunity or the issue into something that makes sense to the business, right? So then leaders get frustrated with that and say, and then tell the middle managers, can you not invite that person to the meeting anymore? It's just not helpful. Can you just take the report and summarize that for us, right? And then something gets lost in translation or slowed down, and it just becomes this catch-22. So it's really, there's a cultural shift here that I'll also talk about is one, how do you hire people hiring experts who do want to be able to talk about the business, who do understand the importance of connecting their ideas with the business. But then as leaders and as an organization, how do you expand your view of leadership to beyond just the people manager, to the idea that everyone has a role as leadership, in particular experts, because that is a form of leadership, this idea of expertship, and their knowledge can influence the organization. And how do you turn that into a leadership cohort as opposed to a service provider, if that makes sense? Did that answer your question?
Absolutely. That was a really great insight. Thanks, Darren.
Thank you. All right. Moving on.
Darren, sorry, Joe has just added one more comment. Doesn't that mean that leaders need to give up what they see as their value they add to the business, which is playing in the strategy domain? That requires a cultural and political shift.
It does. Yeah. So some of these things are much harder to implement than others, but those organizations, the high-performing organizations where they do this well, they have created technical career streams where from the idea of junior specialist to the idea of master expert, but with that role comes the responsibility of real organizational influence. So they take the cultural and the theory and they've turned it into something that's practical and real. And it's hard work, but it's been shown that you pull it off, it makes a huge difference, not just to the value of the organization, but also the retention and the engagement of your high performing experts, right? So there's going to be a lot of experts who never want to progress to that level. But if you don't have the opportunity for your really motivated, high performing experts to progress to an ability to truly influence, you're going to lose them, or at the very least disengage them. So I think in the interest of time, I just need to move on. So recommendation 3, which is around this idea of developing other people and getting stuck into industry trends, is make them accountable for their own succession planning. So most organizations that I've worked in, succession planning also includes technical roles, senior technical roles, not just people leaders. So making technical specialists accountable and responsible as part of the performance plan to develop other people is absolutely critical. And getting them really, there's a lot of research that shows for experts in particular, the role of mentoring has such a massive impact. So getting senior experts and skilling them up to mentor others, to mentor junior experts has been proven by external research to be having a significant impact. And of course, if you find experts or who do this well, recruit them. Just if you add this stuff to your sort of recruitment criteria, and if they fill those boxes, hire them right away, but then celebrate when they do this well. And then coaching skills. So if you're asking experts to develop others, one of the best ways of developing others is coaching skills, which is often given to people leaders. Teach them how to give them coaching skills, coaching frameworks. So give your experts that same training. And then finally, regarding this recommendation, if you do this one thing, do this, is, again, this is one of the much harder things to do than talk about, is this technical career stream. So we have a capability framework that we can if you need some help with some advice, we can sort of help you out a bit in terms of how do you actually develop, go from a career stream from junior expert or specialist to this idea of real organizational influence. It is an executive role that may or may not actually have people leadership, but it is a strategic, company-wide responsibility position. And then finally, the last recommendation, this idea of the hidden parts of the expert roles. So this idea of get them out of that box that organizations tend to put experts in. So this is what the slide I was trying to find. I'm very sorry. So this idea of shifting the role of experts from service to partnership when it comes to strategy, working directly on strategy teams at the executive table in terms of creating that strategy in real time, as opposed to here's a report. Supporting your experts to share that knowledge externally. So the experts, the idea of master expert moves beyond the domain of the organization and is more around lifting the overall level of knowledge within their sphere and becoming seen as a thought leader. And the ability to turn those people into incredible brand ambassadors for you is a fantastic opportunity. Introducing a capability framework, like the one I showed you earlier, can be quite effective to help identify, okay, what are the skills and the tools that are capabilities that I need to progress from junior expert to this idea of mastery. And like I said, you've got to get them also outside thinking. How do you give them the tools, the access, the time, the capacity, and the responsibility to identify threats and opportunities related to their domain, and then form hypothesis in terms of how the organization could respond to those threats and opportunities. That forum, just that process alone, has a training on the job type of impact in terms of developing strategic thinking. And then we talk about, again, this culturally idea of expanding your definition of what leadership is to outside this sort of simplistic idea that people managers are the leaders and no one else. But then again, finally, if you do that one thing, that's the thing that can have the biggest impact, is finding ways to sort of really reinforce that message that there are leadership roles for everybody in the business, not just people leaders. So asking yourself then, what do your experts need to achieve real mastery? And asking, what are you going to do to make the hidden visible? So what you in your organizations are going to do to expand the role of the expert into this sort of more from a service to a partner. So there are things that we could potentially, so this just to finish up in terms of how I might be able to help you. So we're nearing completion of a benchmarking exercise and a tool that will allow past, current, and future clients or customers of our expertship programming and consulting and coaching to benchmark themselves against other organizations to identify where they might have to really focus in comparison to potential competitors or other industries. So we can look at the top, anywhere from the top 10% or the bottom 10%. And you can see that for the most part, there's only one company here, company B, that is in the top 10% across all skills. But for the most part, everyone has strengths and areas of weakness that we could potentially help them focus on to really develop a competitive advantage in terms of attracting and retaining and developing their experts. And then finally, we're about to move into a global research program where we're taking this idea of the hidden to the nth degree, is really identifying what are the organizational practices that hinder and support performance and the potential of internal technical experts. So looking at everything from attraction to recruitment to onboarding and so forth, all the way to promotion. what are all these things, policies, systems, and processes that both hinder and support this move to mastery expert. And our vision is to help 1 million experts globally. So we know we can't, coach or develop 1 million experts ourselves, but certainly we can help organizations understand the tools and what they do and or don't do to really sort of support the performance of their experts. So anyone who's interested, we are looking for at first a cohort of people and organizations to form sort of an advisory group or a panel to really sort of help us flesh out our approach, our hypothesis, how we go actually about doing this. In return, all the research you will get for free out of that, and shape that research as well. So if you're interested in participating in that sort of advisory group at the beginning, give me a call on my phone number or email me. We'll be sending you the deck as well. And I'd love to hear from anyone who's going to be involved and sort of get their ideas. And I'm not expecting a lot of time from people on that advisory panel. And so finally, with questions, there's wondering if there's any questions in the chat. We'll be posting a link to get a chapter to our new upcoming book written by Alistair, our CEO, and my colleague Dominic Johnson around our years of experience around what does it actually take to be a master expert. It's a guide. It's not meant to be read page after page, but we're making the first chapter of that freely available to anyone, which you can download by this link, which we'll put in the chat. But also in the chat, we're putting a link in for to provide just a short bit of feedback about this webinar, just 4 questions. We'd love it if you just take a few minutes to fill that out for us. So I might just stop sharing, and anyone wants to ask any questions,